Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Phil Zimmermann.
Hi. Thank you. So, wow, this is great. Layers of people. It's like a Batman movie or something. For years I've been doing a lot of public speaking where I pretty much have the luxury of just repeating the same speech over and over. But I'm kind of forced to come up with new material now because of the recent NSA revelations. It's been a summer of NSA. NSA all the time. It's been great for my new startup company, Silent Circle. But it's bad for democracy. I'm worried about the concentration of knowledge that I for years have been writing about the emergence of omniscience. If a government can become omniscient by being able to see everything that everyone's doing all the time, then this could create temptations for government to abuse it, and could allow some future government to, if anybody bad comes to power, to hang on to that power. And so these recent revelations have brought out, the things I've been fearing for years, and it's worse than I ever imagined. So now when I talk in the U.S., I talk a lot about domestic spying. I'm not sure that this audience is going to appreciate the importance of what that means, because you guys are more concerned about the NSA spying on you than the NSA spying on me. But I think that all countries have intelligence agencies. All important countries have intelligence agencies. Germany has, the US has, British, the Russians have. But usually these intelligence agencies are for looking out to see what are threats to those countries from outside. But if they turn that surveillance apparatus inward and spy on their own populations, then you usually get a result that you don't like. When we created the NSA more than half a century ago, we kind of had an understanding that the purpose of the NSA and other related spy agencies was to protect the United States from things outside the US. It was the Cold War, we wanted to know what the Soviets were doing, etc. And so we made it illegal for the NSA and the CIA and other intelligence agencies to spy on Americans. Well, that was the deal, and that isn't what we have now. The NSA is collecting the traffic of all Americans everywhere in the US, whether they're suspected of a crime or not. The entire US population is under surveillance. Now, that doesn't mean that they're targeting every single person in the US. What they've done is they've taken the rules about not spying on Americans and kind of reinterpreting them so that they can collect the information for everyone and store it in a vast database, and then have a court decide when they can go into the database and search it and analyze it for a particular target. Well, that's a major reinterpretation. It means that if all that data is there, it becomes attractive to other law enforcement agencies. If the Drug Enforcement Agency, for example, wants to know something about somebody, they can just go and ask. It means that they can see into the past. And all Americans are treated like foreigners, so they can all be surveilled like foreigners. Now, I've always felt that, well, it's kind of irritating to be wiretapped by anybody, but it matters less to me if, let's say, the Chinese are listening to a phone call that I have that's for my personal life, because the Chinese can't arrest me. No one can kick the door in the middle of the night and haul me off to prison from the Chinese government. I don't live in China. I live in the United States. And, for Germans, it's, in my opinion, and maybe you guys disagree with me, but in my opinion, it's less damaging to Germans than it is to Americans that NSA is spying. I mean, the NSA can't affect your life as much as they can affect ours. If they can undermine democracy in the U.S., if the U.S. ever has someone in the White House, let's say in 2017, we don't know who will be in the White House in 2017. If they have the question is, do they have the moral sensibilities of Thomas Jefferson or Vladimir Putin? So if it's more like the latter, then they now have already in place a vast database of any minor misbehaviors of the entire U.S. population. How could that be selectively prosecuted? Maybe opposition parties can be neutralized. Maybe politicians cheating on their spouses can be identified and tracked down and blackmailed. I understand that the Stasi used to do that. They would do signals intelligence to find out who was guilty of marital infidelities, bring them in, blackmail them with the evidence, and then turn them into spying to get the rest of it that was out of reach of signals intelligence. Now they don't have to do that because nothing is out of reach of signals intelligence. Our entire lives are mediated by the internet. So I feel like we're in a predicament. If we're in a country where such a powerful surveillance apparatus has turned on its own population, well, we've seen examples of that around the world. We've seen China, Russia, North Korea. I don't want to compare Russia with North Korea. There's a huge difference between those two examples, but still, generally you get bad results when you have governments turning powerful surveillance apparatus on their own populations. So it's kind of disillusioning to discover that so many American companies have helped the NSA. Many of you here are representing cloud computing companies, cloud storage companies. It's possible that you may find similar things that happen here. Maybe the German government might try to influence how you handle customer data. Maybe they might, well, there's laws here, data retention laws that say you're supposed to hang on to data for a long time so that it can be turned over to the government. If you're trying to design cloud storage or cloud computing, you should do so in a way where you don't keep the keys in the cloud, where you can't read the files, where you can't be coerced into handing things over to the government. If you don't do that, you're going to be viewed with suspicion the same as American companies, because the German intelligence apparatus can do the same thing here that the NSA is doing in the US. Don't let that happen to you. I usually don't give a speech and then have questions at the end. I like to try to have a dialogue that goes throughout the speech. So I'd like to suggest that maybe we get some questions going early. So I know everyone has opinions on this.
Comments are welcome, right?
Yeah, you don't
don't
actually
have
have
to
to put a
have
question mark
questions.
at the end of every sentence, but
Don't talk about your breakfast. That's not that interesting, what you had for breakfast today, but I'm going to jump around.
Hi, Ken Bagnall from the Email Laundry. Phil, what do you think the American companies get in return for helping out the US government?
I don't know. The question is, what do companies get in return? I don't know. I mean, you know, there must be some kind of incentive structure, or why would they do it? Maybe is it their patriotic duty, or do they get money for it? I don't know.
Who knows?
You know, I mean, you ask what do they get in return, but what's happening frequently is that your question is, what about the voluntary cooperation? I'm also concerned about the involuntary pressure that comes up with like national security letters and court orders that get them to turn things over. I mean, probably many of you heard about the LavaBits affair. LavaBits was a company that had an email service that was stored on their servers. And they had some kind of secret order to turn over something. And they tried to resist this, but they were unable to resist it, so they shut down their service. And the next day, or no, actually the same day, Silent Circle did the same. My company, Silent Circle, has a combination of services, secure internet VoIP services, secure instant messaging, and secure email. We no longer have the email service. We shut it down because we figured if it could happen to LavaBits, it could happen to us. So we were expecting to be hit with a national security letter, and to preempt that, we, without warning, irrecoverably erased all of our customers' email. And then after it was thoroughly destroyed, we announced that the email was gone. So, you know, there were a few unhappy customers about that, but we feel like we did the right thing.
Phil, Dave Ratner. Oh, Dave Ratner from Open Wave Messaging, back here in the back. You can't see because of the lights.
Oh, okay.
My question is really around, you know, our lives are so integrated with the internet and the cloud today. I'm curious on how you think consumers will react to the revelations and what's going on. And, you know, my example would be when Google first released Gmail, there was widespread outrage about the fact that, oh my God, they're going to be reading every single one of my emails. And by and large, that outrage lasted maybe 4 or 6 weeks, and then everyone kind of, you know, ignored it, and then everyone just accepted it. And, you know, and we all know that a lot of people use Gmail today and simply accept the fact that they get very interesting ads on their web pages based on the fact that they just received an email about buying a new car, and all of a sudden new car ads show up all over their web pages, kinds of stuff. And so, you know, one aspect is, you know, certainly people are sitting there and saying, well, perhaps I should be on the internet less, perhaps I should, you know, try and, you know, not use these kinds of programs and whatnot. But our lives are so integrated that part of my worry is that all this outrage is, you know, in 4 or 6 weeks or maybe 4 or 6 months is going to turn into acceptance in some way, shape, or form, and I'm curious on your view on that.
If we're going to try to get some political change, some public policy change here, we need to get people to care about it. We need them to sustain political pressure to bring about change. You know, you're going to have to do the same thing here in Germany. You got to get now. Historically, the German public has been more. Well, you have privacy commissions in a lot of the Western European countries, including Germany. We don't have a privacy commission in the U.S. So, you know, you already value the idea of trying not to concentrate, you know, databases of customer data and monetizing it. So you could probably get people to care about that here, more so than the U.S. On the other hand, you've got data retention laws now. So it's, in fact, the data retention laws in Europe are worse than the ones in the U.S. I mean, we aren't required to retain things. We often do because companies like to hang on to data. And in our case, in Silent Circle, we don't keep any call logs, for example, so it's pretty tough for us. It's hard for our engineers to fix problems because we can't look in the log to find out what went wrong. There's no log. You have to sustain people caring about it. You have to get people to stand up on their hind legs and care about it. I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of digressed on rambling there. I think we're in a predicament here. I think that democratic institutions are in danger from this kind of concentration of data and total information awareness. I've written about for years that that there's a danger of bringing together surveillance data from disparate sources, optical character recognition of car license plates, face recognition software behind the video cameras, transaction data from credit cards and travel agencies and things like that. Correlations of movements of people, you know, which people are always going into the same hotel at the same time, you know, who's sleeping with who in that hotel, which politicians can be politically neutralized by their marital infidelities. I've written about this as a kind of a future possibility of something that could happen from the hypothetical fusion of data. But what we've seen now is that this hypothetical fusion of data is real. There really is a fusion of data, a kind of total information awareness, and it's breathtaking in its scope. The engineers, scientists, and mathematicians at NSA, there's 35,000 of them it seems, are very, very clever, and they've done their jobs extremely well, extremely impressively. It's a technically sweet solution. It's elegant, it's amazingly clever, and you know, you have to admire the technical achievement that they've done. But their technical achievement is just, I think, destructive to the long-term prospects of democracy. So we need to change the laws in the US. You need to do things here in Germany to not let the same thing happen here. In fact, you may have the same thing happen here. You don't have Edward Snowden here revealing these things to you. You might learn about some of them because some of the Snowden revelations are probably going to involve the NSA's relationship with other countries, in Germany, for example, like other European allies. But so maybe you will find out about some of the things here, but you're probably going to discover that your own intelligence agencies here are doing similar things. So a lot of you do cloud services. I would recommend that you try to find ways to not store customer data in a way that allows you to access it. Don't, you know, if you're going to encrypt it, don't keep the keys on the server. Don't do things in a way that allows somebody to come in with a document and put it in your hands and say, you have to hand over your customer data. You have to hand over the keys. You know, find a way to architect things so you don't have to do that. If you don't do that, you run the risk of your customers not trusting you. I mean, that's what's going to happen with cloud companies in the US, especially foreign customers. So, yeah.
So Phil, my name is Johannes, and a couple of weeks ago the German Chancellor was more or less asked this question. When I send an email from Hamburg to Berlin, will the email be all the way only in Germany? And can you, as a German chancellor, even save it, or will it go somewhere else?
Well, it
and
depends on your
most probably it will
service
go
provider.
somewhere. It might go somewhere else, and so even other like NSA or so, might tap it. So what is your answer to that? Because you said you might need to change something locally, or is it something what the service provider should change, or is it something what we can legally change? What are your thoughts on that point that
Well,
we
if
do
you
not have
use
any more
it-
local borders?
If you use Gmail, it's going to go to Google servers in the US. So there it can be examined by American intelligence agencies, possibly. If you have some mechanism to keep it within Germany because you're using a German service provider, the question is, how much of that is vulnerable to the German government to look at? I mean, you should be concerned about your own government. That's what I'm trying to tell you, that your own government has more effect on your life than a foreign government. It is a hard problem. You know, even if you encrypt the body of the message, you could use PGP, for example, or one of the, you know, you have a German PGP called GPG. You could use that. That will encrypt the message body. But then what about the metadata? There is still the data that says who it's from, who it's to, the subject matter, the date that it was sent, the size of the message. Those are all exposed. So it's not easy to do. I mean, as I said, we discontinued our email service because of we were you know, our metadata is always exposed, and we had a service where we don't have a PGP client that runs on a mobile phone, so we had to do a server-side implementation of PGP. It was called PGP Universal. It's actually a commercial product, but on that commercial product, the keys are stored on the server, which means that they're vulnerable to someone coming in and demanding that we hand them over under, you know, under legal pressure. So that's why we ended that. I don't think any email is safe from examination of the metadata, at a minimum, even if you have it well encrypted, with keys at the two endpoints rather than on the server. If you do everything right, you still have the exposure of the metadata. The NSA does a lot of surveillance of traffic in Europe. They do that either with cooperation of their German counterparts, or they do it sometimes without the cooperation. So I don't know how safe you are with mail going from two German cities, between two German cities.
Oh, I know. Silent mail, is that the solution? You had no threats by then, but or will there be a new
we
solution?
had not
or
received
what
any
is-
orders to hand over anything. In fact, if we had, we would not be able to shut down the service because
Then it would have been too late.
that would be destroying evidence, and you know, we'd be guilty of obstruction
Will
of
there
justice.
be a new solution, or are you now?
Well-
you don't seem to be a person who gets scared. So what's the next step?
Well, I don't want anyone to know that I'm scared, but well, what we do now is we send short text messages with encrypted attachments, and we do that in a way that uses a peer-to-peer negotiation of keys, so that the keys are never stored on the server. So you could actually accomplish a lot of the things that you normally use email for. If you want to send one of your colleagues a PDF or a spreadsheet, you can do that by sending them a short text message encrypted with, you know, silent text. That's what we're doing with this attachment. And the keys are negotiated only between the two endpoints and not held on a server. There are no keys on the server and no metadata on the server. The stuff goes through, and then it's not stored on the server after that. So that's one way to do it. You can do protocols that are not based on the old original email protocols, the ones that like SMTP and IMAP and POP. Those are nice protocols for their day, but if you're really interested in trying to protect against exposure to major intelligence agencies, then you're probably better off with something with a protocol that doesn't store things on a server. It's okay if it passes through the server transiently, but you have to have policies in place on the server not to keep logs and not to keep track of who's sending messages to who.
And if I would get a call from you, I would probably have a Canadian number popping up on my mobile, right? Something like that.
Well, we use U.S. numbers, but
Okay.
yeah.
We have more questions from your right side.
Brad King from Scaly. Just thinking about the history of things like PGP, there's a long tradition of suspicion around technologies that create privacy. And I'm curious about that. We've got a bit of a shortcut in the world right now. Terrorists use privacy. Therefore, if I want privacy, I'm a terrorist. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about how can we, where is this all headed? Because even using, for instance, something like Tor today, it's suspicious just to touch the thing, because maybe I don't want people to follow my browsing. So I wonder if is there any way we can imagine a world where privacy is respected rather than feared?
Well, okay. One way to deal with this is to just try to make encryption better. That's what I try to do. But that's not enough. We have to push back in policy space. We have to change the laws. We have to get governments to not spy on its own people. Look, it's not that I think that we shouldn't have an NSA. Every country needs to have some kind of intelligence agency. And I'm glad that NSA exists to do its job, but I'd like its job to be constrained to something considerably less than what it's doing now. I think there's an overreach here. There are ways to do protocols that they can't break into. By the way, in all these revelations that have come out in the past few months, I hope you don't mind if I engage in a little bit of risky patting myself on the back, because nowhere in all that stuff did they mention anything about breaking my protocols. So they didn't say they could break PGP, and they didn't say they could break any of my stuff that I'm doing these days, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. In fact, that's probably why, Silent Circle, by the way, is, we do secure VoIP, secure text messaging, and I used to say secure email, but we don't do the secure email now. And our stuff is used by Navy SEALs, It's used by Canadian Special Operations Forces, the British SAS, U.S. intelligence agencies. We had this strategy. You see, my partner is a former Navy SEAL, and when he first contacted me to start this company, I had this idea that, well, probably he's going to be able to get us into government customers a lot quicker than I could. So I said, well, here's the strategy that I'd like to pursue. Let's shield ourselves from being pressured to put backdoors in. So I don't even want them asking us to put backdoors in. I mean, they never asked us to put backdoors into PGP because they knew what the answer would be if they did ask, But I figured they might be tempted to ask if my partner's a Navy SEAL. So let's avoid that problem by having a lot of government customers use our stuff and thereby create the problem of collateral damage. That if you put a backdoor in for the government, well, Google had a backdoor in their servers for law enforcement, and the Chinese government hijacked the law enforcement apparatus to spy on Chinese dissidents. Anytime you put a backdoor in, it's going to get abused like that. I'm not even sure that there's any way to use a backdoor without it being, it's by definition abused. So we can make sure that nobody even just brings up the question of a backdoor by the fact that, U.S. government customers are going to depend on it for, life-critical situations. So the collateral damage would be so great that they wouldn't even bring it up. And actually, the strategy seems to be working. I don't know if that's specifically why, but maybe it's because they still sense a kind of that it's kind of useless to ask.
We have one last question here to your right.
We are pretty close at the topic that I wanted to ask. It's about dealing with politicians. What would you recommend how to deal with politicians explaining the situation, explaining the depths of this problem? For example, in Germany we have the email, which is said to be secure, but in the end they skipped the end-to-end encryption for several reasons and decided to have the emails not encrypted from one user to the other, but on the servers or something like that.
Yeah.
So and
Generally
after
speaking-
that, they defined that to be the secure way.
Yeah, if you see an architecture like that, I think that should raise your eyebrows, you know? If you see an architecture like that, that's usually an indication that, well, let's put it this way. If they had an alternative and they chose this instead, then that's kind of suspicious. Now, in our case, our silent mail, we started out with silent mail with we don't have any PGP encryption on the device. There is no PGP implementation for an iPhone or for Android. So we were kind of stuck. We had no choice but to do it on a server. And we figured, okay, we'll just work on a client-side solution in the long run, and we'll just do the server thing for a short time, and then we'll switch over. But you know, in this kind of political atmosphere, even that was just a bad idea. So we just decided to end the service entirely. So in our case, we did want to do it on the client, but we just couldn't because it would take us too long to write the software. We had to get to market sooner. And our real products our flagship products are the secure VoIP, and we didn't want to delay that, secure text messaging. And you can accomplish almost all your communication objectives of text. It's not the same as email, but you can still get a lot of the same objectives met by sending it as text messages.
Okay, so many questions for now. We're going to have you back for the Crossfire session at 4:30, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you can think about more questions for later on. Thank you so much for your time, Phil Zimmermann. It's a pleasure having you as our guest. Thank you.
Thank you.